Hi, I'm Jake Kouns, CEO of Risk-Based Security. Welcome to this edition of The Right Security, the show which we spend time talking with leaders and veterans in the security space, tackling the issues of the day. Today, I'm joined by Kit Merker. Kit's the Chief Operating Officer at Noble9. He has 20 years of experience in large-scale software development projects. He's worked in a variety of roles from coding to engineering manager to evangelism and even product management. Prior to Noble9, Kit helped grow JFrog into a billion-dollar company. He worked as a product manager for Kubernetes and related container initiatives for Google Cloud. Prior to that, he spent, looks like 10 years at Microsoft and worked on a bunch of different products including Azure, Office 365, Bing, and more. Kit, I've known you now for a couple years, and we met when you were at JFrog. It's been great that we're staying connected, and welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Jake. Thanks for having me.
All right. Today, I want to spend some time talking about a few topics with you. I want to talk about service level objectives, SLOs, but also I want to talk a little bit about ensuring how security is built into high growth startups. So this is the first time that you and I've had a chance to catch up since you were promoted, which kudos to you, to COO. I think it was at the end of the last year. I did like the Kit gets promoted and then suddenly like 2 months later, there's a big Series B raise. So kudos to you, and some exciting things happen. But before we get into learning more about Noble9, which I want to do, I want to take a moment for you to help us define some terms for the viewers. I'd like to get you, a few of these acronyms, right? There's quite a few of them in this space, actually. But I've got 4 in particular that I'm curious about: SLA, SLO, SLI, and SRE. So how about this? How about I'll say a term, and then you give us sort of the definition and your thoughts. Work for you?
That sounds like a great game.
All right, let's get rolling. First one. SLA, Service Level Agreement.
Well, an SLA, generally speaking, is an agreement between 2 organizations, and it could be across company boundaries, or it could be, an agreement within an organization that I'm going to deliver a service to you at a certain level. And the implication is that if I don't deliver the service at that level, there's going to be some sort of consequence related to that. That's really what the SLA represents. And it could be across a number of different dimensions or metrics, but it's a general term for an agreement that you and I have about the consequences for not meeting a particular level of service.
Okay. So then now the one that we're hearing more often, service level objectives, SLOs. What is that?
Well, it's funny because the 2 terms are very similar. And I think one of the key distinctions between an SLA and an SLO is that an objective is a goal as opposed to an agreement that we have. And so I can set goals for myself that may or may not have consequences. Really, the SLO could be used to inform decision-making in an organization to say, how well are we performing a particular service? And the common usage of SLOs today, what we're seeing happen is related to some of these other things, these SLIs, SRE we'll get to in a second, but setting objectives specifically on service metrics for operational systems, for software systems, and saying, we can set a goal that's less than perfect, but will still give us a great, excellent user experience, because getting to 100% is very difficult. So what we see instead is people setting, 3 nines, 4 nines goals on particular use cases or service boundaries to inform decisions about how to run and operationalize a set of software services.
All right. So now the next one, and I think this may be one that a little less people have heard. SLIs, Service Level Indicators. What are we talking about here?
This is my least favorite of the terms, but it's probably the most important. The way I think about this is, if you're familiar with a KPI, key performance indicator, if you think of a service KPI, that's what an SLI really is. So imagine, if you have a business or you have a system, you might have lots of metrics, lots of data about what's going on. And there's a few key indicators that tell you an awful lot about what's happening that you really want to pay attention to. And the SLI is that. It's really the key indicators of a service. And I'm using the term service kind of in the technical sense in a way, right? You think about software as a service, microservices, all this service-oriented architecture that we have now. Everything in software, software plus cloud is a service, right? Those services have metrics, and the small subset of the most important metrics that matter to my users and my business, that's what I would define as an SLI. And then relating it back to the SLO, you take that objective and it would be a specific point on the indicator. So if the indicator was telling me that, my good request divided by total requests for a HTTP service, if that was, 99.9% of the time, I might set an SLO that's only 99%, and then I'd be well exceeding the SLO. So that's really how the two relate. But I think whenever you see SLI in your head, replace it with service KPI, and it will just make intuitive sense.
Well, that helps a lot. Oh, okay, so the last one, SRE, Site Reliability Engineering. What are people meaning when they say this?
Well, the most interesting word in that acronym is the site. Okay, and this is where I think people get hung up a little bit. So the reliability engineering or SRE approach, what we're talking about here, and I think this was coined by Ben Traynor over at Google, is basically taking a software engineering approach to operations. If you think kind of back to traditional approach to software operations or IT operations, you'd have sort of the developers on one side and have the operations people on the other side. And there's a lot of operational tasks that are not necessarily software engineering tasks. And in the SRE parlance, they call that toil. Okay, if you take the site word and you think, okay, we're really talking about site as in website. We're trying to keep the web up and running for our system. In reality, the S often stands for software or service. When people think about this, so the site word is kind of, I'd say, euphemistic. It came from kind of the Google history. You'll see other people. I was just talking to a customer earlier this week that they've decided to just drop the S and they're calling it reliability engineering. At Facebook, they call it production engineering. The discipline of SRE is really about reliability, meaning how well does our system work in regard to the reliability? How consistently does it perform the service our users and our business require? And doing that in an approach that's really driven by software engineering, where you're building automation and systems that handle the risk and make the system more resilient. Fun fact about SRE is it's actually the number 5 fastest growing job on LinkedIn as of last year, and it's the number 2 in the infrastructure and development space after full stack engineer. So it's a really hot role. Growing quickly, and it's kind of an evolution of IT ops, evolution of DevOps, and also what we're seeing even more is people who are in the quality assurance or testing part of the software teams are really moving into the SRE space.
All right, appreciate that. I think our viewers will as well. So, all right, now that we have a baseline here, let's talk about Noble 9 specifically. If someone goes to your website, and we'll drop links in the show notes at the end, the websites and all that sort of stuff. But if we go to your website, the main message on the landing page says this: reliability at your service. Noble 9 service level objectives platform connects your reliability metrics to business goals via a modern engineering workflow. What does that really mean? And what is Noble 9?
Well, I appreciate you critiquing the website, Jake. This is great. Well, the reliability at your service, I'm pretty proud of the tagline. I mean, I think there's a couple of different layers of meaning here. At your service, we're really trying to help organizations discover the right level of service for their systems. And the reality, which is maybe hard to admit, is that you can't build a perfect piece of software. It can't be done, and you can't run a perfect business. If you spend all of your available resources on reliability, you'll have no gross margins. I say, if you're going to send somebody to Mars, you can get away with that. But here, on planet Earth, if we're running a business, we have to leave some room for risk and failure and change in the system. And what organizations are realizing is that just striving to make things as reliable as possible or as performant as possible is a fool's errand. And they end up throwing a ton of money and resources and people at trying to run systems perfectly. And the result is, they wake up at 3 a.m. to deal with an outage that's not really an outage, that has no customer impact, or they slow down the release cycle because they have to move slowly to make sure they're not breaking anything in production. And so when you think about SLOs, there's one more term that we didn't talk about, which is called an error budget. An error budget is when you set a goal for how much error you allow in a system. If you take 100% and you subtract the SLO, that is where the error budget comes from. So think if I say 3 nines, 99.9% SLO on a particular SLI, right, to use our terms, what I'm really saying is 0.1% of error is acceptable and I can safely ignore it. And this is where the power comes from. If you can design your engineering system, your operational system to account for a specific goal of error, then you can allow your team to ignore things that are not going to have any user impact. This is what we mean about taking reliability metrics and tying it to user impact and business KPIs. If you're trying to run a business, you want to know how reliable the system should be. And actually, the even more direct question is, how much unreliability can we get away with? Which sounds like a crazy question to ask, but if you're trying to build a system that's efficient and meets your customer demands, not just gold-plated infrastructure, but really meets the customer demands, you want to ask that: how much unreliability can we get away with? And the customer, the user, right, will retry on their end. They'll blame the internet, they'll blame act of God, and they'll still buy the shoes, or they'll still upload their check, or they'll still purchase the stock on the stock market, or they'll still stream the video. Right? There's some amount of unreliability that everyone will put up with. And so Noble 9, what we do, we built a platform that is purely focused on SLOs, on this methodology that was developed at Google and other internet scale companies. We've made it simple and easy for everybody who's not Google to take this methodology and bring it in. An important decision we made is we're not another monitoring or observability company. We actually sit on top of existing monitoring systems, so you don't have to change that. You don't have to consolidate down to one monitoring system to rule them all. We also fit in to your incident response system, so we can alert you when an SLO is at risk, when an error budget is being depleted before it happens, so you can get ahead of it, either in Slack or PagerDuty, or even kicking off automation to auto scale or roll back a release. And then with that engineering workflow, the other really important thing is, and I talked to a company this morning, literally this morning, who told me that all their SLOs are in Google Docs. And what we've done is we've created a rich, expressive YAML language to describe SLOs, error budgets, thresholds, and all the other related concepts. You can check it into source control, make it part of your CI/CD process, follow the GitOps, infrastructure as code, a modern way of building software. And this allows for a really powerful encoding of your business rules related to reliability that's not just putting it in spreadsheets and documents, but really making it part of your automation system. And so, we spent the last year building this platform. We did an extensive beta with a number of early adopters. We just launched the general availability, and we've got some really amazing customers now that have taken the reliability into their own hands and are really embracing SLOs. It's for me, very humbling to see the amount of traction that's happening. And I think we were in the right place at the right time. SLOs have really kind of caught the zeitgeist, if you know what I mean. As SRE is going crazy, and the SLO is really the differentiator between SRE and kind of traditional operations methodologies.
All right, so if someone's watching this right now and they're listening to you, but it feels like you're dumping a lot on them, and they're saying, "Man, I think that Kit guy and Noble 9, they're on to something, but how the hell am I going to go tell my boss or my manager that this is something that we need to look into?" So if I asked you to try to have a concise way to explain to someone, like, why is an SLO so much different than the other way we've already been doing this for so long, right? It's not like we haven't been running websites with availability for a while. And why should what can I tell someone to say, hey, this is really appropriate for us to consider as an organization? And you hit it on the head. We're not Google, right? We're not some mega corp. So what are your thoughts? How would you advise someone to pitch their management on why this is important?
It's a great question, and trying to make it all about dollars and cents and risk and all this kind of stuff. I don't like to simplify it to the point of being, just kind of, save time, save money. I think what it really comes down to is about building an organization that is ready for the digital revolution that we're in, and then it has been accelerating. And when we look back, we've been hearing about digital transformation. COVID made digital transformation real. Now we're in this reopening, and the reality of the world going forward, I hope you don't disagree with me on this. Digital matters a lot, maybe matters more than physical. Software is everywhere. remote and mobile and web is the norm. It's how we do payments. It's how we do entertainment. It's how we do connect with our friends and family. It's super critical. So if you're going to prepare your organization to handle it, and I'm not just saying making it more reliable, but achieving the reliability that doesn't hurt your reputation and doing that in an efficient way. If you're chasing reliability, meaning that you don't want to ever embarrass yourself in front of your customers, but you haven't created a systematic approach for your teams to make great decisions about whether to work on features or technical debt, whether to over provision your system or give back some of that money, you're going to be constantly on one side or the other of this reliability, what I like to call the edge of excellence for customer service, where customers are experiencing precisely the correct amount of reliability that both maximizes their experience and allows the business to operate sustainably and efficiently. This is the difference. It's about finding that balance point, which is incredibly hard to discover without a systematic, data-driven approach. And SLOs combine the data you probably already have with explicit goals that are driven by user and business demands and can create a feedback loop between the business and technical stakeholders that frankly doesn't exist today. The language to talk about the correct reliability for a service between the business and technical stakeholders is very hard. SLOs give you this framework where you can now say, okay, if 1 out of 10,000 people has a 50% degraded performance on their mobile check upload, using a banking example, are we okay with that? Are we okay if 1 out of 1,000 has that? What about 30% degradation versus 50% degradation? This is the language that translates directly into SLOs and translates directly into engineering requirements and can kind of span the gap. It really is a different way of quantifying the business requirements for any sort of digital services. And today, every organization is on top, is completely dependent on it. So I guess the short story is, if you're gonna keep customers happy on digital, SLOs are the only way that you can tell the engineers how to actually do that.
That helps a lot. All right, so how should companies view SLOs and software reliability engineering with a security context, right? We've got a lot of security folks that follow us, and of course, we're in that space in your background. But as you know, right, the information security triad, a lot of security professionals have been taught over the years that availability is actually a security responsibility. Maybe not, someone else. But so what are your thoughts on how all these concepts sort of blur, cross the lines, or interact with security?
It's a really amazing question. As we're looking at the, there's sort of like the core software development stuff. It's all about features, right? It's like features and capabilities. And then there's the ancillary stuff, which to me is actually more important, right? The basics of building a software service: reliability, performance, security, scalability, maintainability, et cetera. All these other things that sometimes get treated as a secondary consideration after features. I think we're going through a renaissance right now in a way where some of these infrastructure and basics and secondary concerns are kind of becoming the primary. We're seeing tons of innovation in this and other things. To put it kind of more concretely, setting SLOs around security response, think about like, okay, we've got to patch our fleet, whether it's a container fleet, VM fleet, or a physical server fleet. We got to patch that stuff and keep it up to date. Are we in compliance with the latest versions? You're never going to be 100% in a large enough organization. So then you want to ask yourself questions about, are we willing to take what previously I would have called an SLA, right? Of what percentage of our servers will be patched within X amount of days from being aware of the issue, moving that into an SLO where it's now the team driving a performance for themselves and deciding how to manage those risks and modeling the security risks in terms of a very high percentage, but less than 100%, and then measuring, monitoring, and improving using SLOs by defining explicit goals, and not just saying, well, let's make it as secure as possible, right? But instead, let's set specific metrics. And we see this in use at a number of larger organizations, Google and others, where they actually do set SLOs specifically on their security practices and whether that's sort of patches and things like that. It also has an effect on your traffic, right? If you're getting a DDoS attack right now and you want to know whether or not you can continue to serve your real customers while you're also experiencing some level of vulnerability, if you will, or attacker traffic, that's an important thing too. So if you think about setting an SLO for availability or latency, and then applying synthetic transactions and perhaps even having red team or even natural attackers coming in, adding traffic to your service, are you still able to deliver your service to customers under that loaded situation? And do you have a resiliency strategy in place for that, for how you will notice it, how you will respond to it, ideally in an automated fashion? If the automated fashion fails, can you automatically escalate to an on-call? Can you automatically drain workloads from one area to another so that you can free up resources or fail over to an appropriate data center? All those kinds of activities can all be driven by SLOs and error budgets. And it really starts with the measurement, figuring out what the SLIs are that matter for those processes and services, and then setting objectives that give you the correct boundary between or threshold between delivering a service that will work for your users and business, and then also gives you enough freedom that your team can operate within their budget and handle the risks that really matter and not pay attention to every little thing that may be noise. And as we know, there are a lot of false alerts in the world about security patches and versions, things like that. And so giving yourself some freedom, which is what the error budget represents, some degrees of freedom to ignore things that really don't matter right now, that are still important, but they're not so urgent that you need to interrupt sleep, for example. That's really where I would apply SLOs into that thinking. And I do think taking security and reliability engineers together, collaborating to make sure that the non-feature parts of the service are all working, that's a really important evolution that's happening, I think, in companies as well.
So at your JFrog Swamp Up keynote in 2017, you gave a talk that was called "Update All the Things," and it had kind of a focus on IoT. But at the beginning, you ended up interviewing like a whole bunch of people, asking for perspectives about IoTs and updates and kind of the good and bad. And something that stuck out to me was you asked this question, right? That said, "Don't you want the latest updates? Don't you want to be running like the latest version?" And the answer was pretty much a resounding no, right? It was like no. And one of the quotes I remember is it said, "It can cause a lot of stress." So I'm guessing that the answer didn't surprise you then. Do you think people still feel that same way? And now that you've even switched roles, do you feel that way?
Wow, it's a deep cut there, Jake. I love it. Going back a few years, and yeah, that was a really fun event and really an eye-opening experience for me, talking to so many people. We did kind of the man on the street interviews for that particular video, and asking people about the software updates. And it was a question that's a little bit of a leading question, to be honest, because when we say latest, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the latest code change that was just typed by a developer that hasn't even been committed to the repo? Or are we talking about the latest version that was tested and released, maybe even put in some amount of production testing? And I think the real answer to the question is there isn't informed consent. There isn't the ability for the layperson to make a judgment. And they're operating out of fear and ignorance to a large extent. And again, no fault of their own. I mean, there's no reason why we should have to have the full understanding of that. But I think one of the big changes we're going to see is, everything's more digital, and there will be more practices around how we responsibly update software. And it will be less about the mechanics of the software update and more about the process, meaning that it's not about how long does it take to download and install. It's about what testing, what certification, what process did the organization go through to consistently deliver a highly trusted update to the system. And so designing for failure, where you're going to know you're going to have some percentage of bad updates, you need some discovery mechanism for that. You need to have recourse to roll back. Having all those systems designed well is really what's going to boost that confidence level, so that it's not even a question to ask. It's not a fair question for the consumer to ask them do they want the latest version, because that question is far outside their ability to even understand, right? Even if I gave them the release notes, they can't make an informed decision about whether or not they want a particular software update. And that was really what I was kind of driving at with that whole series. And it applies to cloud, it applies to mobile, it applies to IoT. It's all the same kind of thing. They have different modalities of updates, but the informed consumer just doesn't have the information to make a good decision. And so it's incumbent upon us as service providers to make sure we have the right processes for quality, reliability, security, performance, et cetera, in place, so that our users can get the advantage without taking the risk.
And it leads me to my next question here. I love that your security background, a practitioner, your security background, and now moving into the SLO reliability area. I think it's great. For a long time, I've been trying to pitch people on, if you think about total quality management, TQM, security is sort of the same thing with quality, right? You could call it total security management. But here's my question. Given your security background, right, how do you actually lead a team that's growing quickly, building innovative products that want to get those features and get to market fast, but you also got to make sure that security is considered and properly built in, and we get all those security updates, because just like you said, it's on us, as many of the consumers just don't understand, or really they can't really do much about it.
Well, first, I'll just say, I don't consider myself to have a real security background, but I'm security adjacent. I've been around it for a long time and had to cross many security reviews at many big companies that had quite the process. One of the interesting things about being an early stage company that's very different is you start to make trade-offs, and you start to anticipate the things that are going to come. We're selling into enterprises, and enterprises have particular requirements around, SOC 2 compliance and other things. And you want to start from a foundation of kind of security thinking without, at the same time, stifling the innovation on the team. I think this is really kind of the core trade-off that we get to in building systems, and the total quality, way of thinking, right? Where you say, hey, we want to really think about all angles and all sides of a system and define its quality, and define the different ways we will measure and manage the quality of a system. Even the idea of things like Six Sigma, right? Where if you think about it, Six Sigma is actually 5 nines, which is quite interesting. That is a very high bar, and it will necessarily slow down your innovation and your delivery. And so there's a trade-off to be made, and there's an acceptable risk to be made. And I think the challenge a lot of organizations face is they don't know how to have that conversation in a realistic way. It either gets bogged down through bureaucracy, through organizational silos, or through kind of finger wagging, if you know what I mean, where it's like, well, why didn't you go through all the security requirements? Why didn't you check all the boxes? And this creates a level of frustration, because you have a team that's trying to innovate to see if something even makes sense, and then they get bogged down with all the security requirements. So I guess for me, like, the way I think about this now is you want to be stage appropriate. You want to be leaning ahead and be cutting edge. You want to do the things that are going to make a big difference. But again, with the renaissance that's happening right now, what we're seeing is so many service providers, so much shift left, so much more data-driven stuff. The state of the art is within reach for organizations. They just have to kind of get out of their own way. They have to start thinking about this in a very practical way, get it closer to the code, get it closer to the people on the ground, and make reasonable decisions. Not trying to make everything perfectly secure, of course not. Not trying to make everything open and do whatever you want, but finding the right balance, the right mix for their specific risks and their specific stage of business, because wherever you are, there is an appropriate level, and you have to make the hard call on that. And there's always going to be risk in the system. And there's always going to be some threats and things outside your control. And if you try to live a perfectly risk-free life and create a perfectly risk-free business, it's impossible. But that, on the other hand, you want to manage the risks to the best of your ability and budget, I think, is kind of how I'd look at it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but this is, I think that very similar things could be said about reliability engineering, about testing, about performance management, or kind of latency throughput type performance. I mean, application performance. A lot could be, the same things could be said there, that there's a reasonable level. You want to find that level and constantly be questioning, are we finding that? Are we slowing ourselves down too much, or are we exposing ourselves to risks too much? And find the balance that is appropriate for the organization, and empower people to move, to make things happen. I think that's super important.
Thank you. So you've spent a good amount of time in the past couple of years sharing and helping with your thoughts on being an entrepreneur and startups and the investment world and a lot of these things. So, what's your current view of the startup scene, if you will, the investment world? I mean, hearing about deals that are closing and funding that's closing with not having in-person meetings, and the world's a little bit different right now. But do you have any sort of quick thoughts on for those that are in the startup investment world?
Easy questions every time. I love this. The thing that's to me very interesting right now is things that we thought would never happen are happening. I have never lived in Silicon Valley, and a lot of people have always told me that you have to be in the Valley. And I think that the reasons why Silicon Valley has thrived, they've had a little bit of a monopoly on tech capital and talent and things like that. It's changing, and we're watching it change. It's been changing and it's accelerating. And now what we're seeing is remote teams and people who are in different countries and different cities are able to operate at a level that previously was unseen. And I remember I think it was last March or April, I talked to a VC who told me that they did their first funding deal in the history of the firm where they didn't meet the entrepreneur in person and they wired the money. And they were like, yeah, the lightning didn't come out of the sky. And now, it sounds crazy that we wouldn't be able to do that. Now we can see so much more happening remotely. I believe that there's no replacement for in person. I think we don't need to be in person quite as much as we used to. In terms of what's happening as an entrepreneur, fundraising, those kinds of things, I will say that it seems like there's a lot going on, that there is capital available. I think there's more capital available than there are companies that are kind of worthy investments to a large extent, which is usually the case. If you have a strong team, value prop, product market fit, traction, et cetera, I think funding it can be done. We were lucky enough to be able to pull that off, but by the skin of our teeth. So I definitely encourage any entrepreneurs out there to go after it. But I think you do have to be really buttoned up now on the customer traction. I think this is where there's a lot of I would say concern about budgets from end customers as they're thinking about. I think maybe less of a concern now as things are reopening, or we're seeing the green shoots of reopening over the last year. A lot of budget concern from customers, and so you have to kind of present a very clear, compelling story for why they're going to spend their precious budget on whatever it is you're selling. The other important thing to recognize is how go-to-market changes. We are now faced with virtual events and different ways of educating and teaching the market about whatever it is you're doing. And this forces you to really tell a crisp, compelling story, to take advantage of digital, to do online stuff, which is completely different. Hopefully, we'll be able to do more in-person types of selling activities. But I also think that there's a permanence to the change, that more and more will be done remotely, and we will need to be smart about it, because I think people's tolerance to get on a plane, they're going to realize that they didn't need to be traveling quite as much as they were before, and it's going to take some time to get back to where we were, if we ever do. So I think the business environment generally right now, I think there's a lot that can be done, and there's plenty of opportunity out there, but you got to be smart about how you adapt to the reality of the market these days.
So you know that at RBS we also track data breaches, right? We have a product called Cyber Risk Analytics. We track how breaches happen, so we can sort of advise people not only like what to focus on from a security standpoint, but even your vendors and all that. And while 2020 was a weird year and the breach sort of landscape changed a bit, it's clear that prioritizing security is hard for any size company. So as a startup investment sort of guy, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on cyber insurance. We've been involved in that space a lot as well. But what are your thoughts about cyber insurance, and do you think about that or recommend that to startups?
It's insurance is always one of those things where it's hard to recognize you need it unless you're forced to. You know what I mean? Like it's always one of those things where, with a car, you've got, a legal mandate that you have to have it, but when you start thinking about the other kinds of insurance that, maybe are more exotic, you may not be top of mind. And I think there's an early stage company, and I shouldn't say this because it'll probably falsify as soon as I say, is that, you think, oh, well, we're not a target, right? Or early stage, nobody knows who we are. We're not a target. And by the way, our data isn't that valuable at this stage. So, we probably shouldn't worry about this. And that is probably the wrong way to look at it. I think being proactive and finding ways to mitigate the risk is important. And so I think a combination of having good practices, learning from any sort of near misses is really important. Getting the basics right, and then I think augmenting it with some level of insurance, I think makes perfect sense. I wouldn't do it in lieu of or as an excuse not to take some precautions for sure. And you don't want to ever treat an insurance policy as a reason to go nuts. But I like the idea of it, and it seems to make sense to me. I don't think we have it. So now you're making me nervous.
I will tell you, we've been big fans of cyber insurance for a long time, and with the rise of ransomware and all these events, having a partner there, even for startups, is I believe it's a really, really smart move. So just curious, and we can always talk insurance another time too. But hey, I got an odd question for you. Are you ready for this one? Here we go. I found 4 songs and videos for 2015 posted from an album called Please Everyone. These seems like sort of hidden gems. They only have 15 to 30 views. Like, what's going on here? Am I missing something?
15 to 30 views, really? I don't know. I guess my mom found the.
What's happening here, brother? What am I finding here?
You did some deep research on me, some Oppo research. I recorded a short record, years ago with a friend who. It's actually kind of a amusing story. We snuck into a theater at Microsoft. It was a kind of an abandoned theater from a acquired building, and we set up some microphones in the dead of night and recorded live takes, just me and my guitar and singing some songs, and mastered it and put out a record, and that was that. I had I'd previously been playing music with some other fellas, playing some shows and things like that, and I decided to do a solo record, and then that was that. And then I left Microsoft and went to Google, and I got insanely busy, and I kind of stopped recording music. So there you go.
I liked it, actually. And by the way, for anyone, I might have to put these in show notes too, the videos. It's even on Spotify too. So I was like, is this another kit or is this my kit? And then I kind of looked at the picture and I'm like, I think it's my boy. So anyways, it was very cool. All right, hey, we're running out of time here. I got time for one more thing.
Running out of questions.
No, I got plenty more questions. I just don't have enough time. I have to bring you back on. But here's what I want to end on, right? 2020 and COVID challenge for a ton of companies, right? I mean, it really was. Even industries that you would imagine, shouldn't have been impacted. There's been impact with staff and families and business and budgets, all that sort of stuff. So, again, with your startup sort of background, and anyone that's watching that has started a company in 2020 or is in process or wherever they are in their journey, what do you look, in some ways the pandemic really helped drive some of that digital transformation faster, right? What advice maybe do you have to someone as the pandemic's winding down? What sort of thoughts can you give them as they're trying to keep focused and positive and move their company forward?
If we survived this as a business, it's preparing you for hard times, and that makes you more resilient. I think what we've seen historically, I mean, putting this a little bit broader context, is that companies that can be successful during downturns and turmoil, if you can come out the other side, you come out stronger and more prepared, leaner, and more committed to your mission. And at least this is what I'm telling myself at this point to keep us running. it's been a challenge, but I think that starting a company during this time has forced us to really focus on what matters, to build the relationships with people in a way that it cuts through the nonsense. It becomes a filter for what truly matters and what is a part of building a business that's either driven by legacy or ego or kind of your norms of how you think a business is run. And once you get past that and you go, well, wait a second, what really matters here is the people and the customers and the product, and everything else kind of fades away. And you start to take care of each other. You start to check in on each other on the things that matter, and you let everything else go. And it's a refreshing way for me to build a business where we can focus. And I know that every organization has its challenges, and you get bigger in bureaucracy, lines of communication, things like that. All that becomes a challenge. But I hope others see this the same way, is that it's become an incredible clarity of focus and prioritization, where you are working in a different way and having to be creative and get past it, and you come out stronger. And that gives me just a ton of hope. And I hope other people have felt a similar way. And I'm sure not everyone has been as fortunate to be able to, to get through this the way that we have. I feel very blessed and fortunate to have, the financial ability and the being in a tech space that lends itself well to remote work, and having a distributed team and all this other stuff that's really been a powerful part of it. But I think now, looking forward, we are at a point where the hope is there, on the horizon, and I'm excited for the future. And I guess that's my take on it. It's it's a little late now to be saying this, because if you went back 6 months or something, I think the message would probably be a bit clearer. But I might not have been quite as hopeful. But my lived experience of it is that this has been an extraordinary time, and I mean that both in the unusualness, but also in the outcome. I believe what our team, my peers and employees and everything else, what we've been able to accomplish. I don't know that we would have been able to in a normal time. I just don't know that we would have had the determination, the focus, and the tenacity to do it. It would have been done in a more more indirect way. We would have had more distractions, and we would have had, we have to have an offsite and pick offices and these kinds of things. All this stuff just faded away. It was, let's go get this done. And that, to me, I think every organization should question themselves and say, well, like, what would we do in a pandemic? How would we build this business in a pandemic? Is, I think, could be a great way to frame, the kind of efficiency that a startup or any organization could use as a thought exercise to really drive that clarity of focus about the essence of the business.
Perfect. All right, there we have it. Kit Merker, Chief Operating Officer, Noble Nine. Get out. It was great catching up. Enjoyed the conversation. We'll have to do it again. I got a bunch more questions, but thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jake. It was a pleasure, and I'll forgive you for bringing up my past.
Talk soon.